Hello, this is Carrie again, and I have another video for you today. Today I will be doing a video on watercolor pencils, and I'm just going to talk about different ways to use them. I have here this little sheet that I made, and we're actually in the video, you're going to see me make this sheet and talk about all the different ways that I use them. But before we get started, I realized that I did not show you a picture of some watercolor pencil pieces. So this is my current work in progress. This is from Romantic Country, and you can see I took it out of the sheet and I taped it down on this board, and I'll give you guys a link to this board down in the description below. But it's basically just like an art board, it's just a giant clipboard, and I use this for taping down. This is actually the back of the giant clipboard. Hold on, let me show you the front. This is the front of the giant clipboard, and I just taped it down so that it would be able to not lift as I get wet. And I used pretty much all the different methods that I talked about in this video, in this page, which is not yet finished, but I wanted to show you guys the work in progress and to show you guys some of the things that I've done with watercolor pencils. So this is the other thing that that I wanted to show you guys. This was done with watercolor pencils, and this is just my remote control. And this was done this is a 30-minute speed sketch with watercolor pencils, and this is my drop spindle that I use for spinning wool. And this was also done with the Albrecht Durer watercolor pencils. So I just wanted to show you guys some completed pages because I didn't show you guys that later on in the video. All right, so now we can get started on the actual content. Okay, so what I will be using for this video is I will be using my Albrecht Durer watercolor pencils. You can use any kind of water-soluble pencils, but for this I will be using my Albrecht Durer watercolor pencils that I got a while back with one of my very first Google checks, and this is a wood box set, and I'll give you a link to this one down in the description below. Anyway, watercolor pencils are actually slightly misnamed. They are more accurately referred to as water soluble pencils, and what they are is you can lay them down as dry, and you see that in the very first one that's green and yellow, and just leave them dry, and then you can use them as dry pencils. So that's one way to use them, but if you add water, then you can activate them with water, and they become very similar to watercolor, and in fact sort of function pretty much exactly the same as watercolor once you apply water. And so that's what I'm doing here with this one, is I'm just applying a little bit of water and then just putting that down below so that you can see that that's what it actually is. There is a little bit of a drying shift with them depending on which brand you use and depending on which ones you get. Okay, so the next thing here is I just showed you a little bit of color indexing. So color indexing just basically means that the different products across the company's line will match up via either the same name or the same color number. So on the side that I have, on one side is just the regular dry polychromos, and on the other side is the water-soluble Albrecht Durer watercolor pencils. And as you can see from the polychromo side, they remain dry, and only the Albrecht Durer become activated with water. And so by using that, you can create all sorts of different techniques. What I like to do is I like to go in with the Albrecht Durer first and then go over them with the polychromos to create some interesting effects. All right, next up is we're just going to talk about different ways to use them on wet paper. So one way to use them on wet paper here is to wet the paper and then apply color onto a palette. So I'm using the Caran d'Ache watercolor palette that is rough on one side for you to use with pencils and is smooth on the other side for you to use with like paints or crayons or whatever. But anyway, I just activate some pencil from the palette and apply it onto the wet paper surface to create an effect very, very similar to a wet on wet technique that you would see with watercolor paints. And this creates a sort of a much softer edges, much softer glow. So this effect is really useful for if you want to have like a soft faint lines So that's what you would use that wet on wet technique for. All right, so at this point, I just take that dissolved pigment that I dissolved earlier for the wet on wet, and I just applied that directly to the dry paper, and you can see that there is a slightly different effect of applying it to the dry paper versus to the wet paper. So that's one thing that is a little bit different, but I still apply a little bit more pigment to that dry paper. For this part, I am using a silver black velvet brush, but I think at various points I do use a water brush, and I'll link to all the different things that I use down in the description below. Okay, so for this next section, as you saw, the paper was wet earlier, so I just applied a little bit of pencil pigment directly to the wet paper, and I don't think it showed up as well, so at some point I did switch to a different color. But anyway, when you apply the dry pencil to wet paper, you get a much stronger pigment, and you get a much stronger payload when you do that. But there is a flip side, and the flip side is that because that pigment was already wet when you applied it, because the pigment was wet, as soon as you applied it to the paper, if you try to go back in and dissolve those lines, then those lines become much more difficult to dissolve. But if you want to have some really strong pencil lines, then that's one way to get some really strong pencil lines, is by having wet paper and adding the pencil and dissolving the pencil. Okay, so this one did cause some controversy. A lot of people said that I gave bad advice in the other video. Essentially, what you can do is that you can wet the brush and then put the tip of the brush to the tip of the pencil and apply that pigment to the paper, and that's another way to get a stronger load of pigment. Now, the difference between doing this way and applying the pencil to wet paper is that if you use the tip to tip method, then you can still move that pigment around and you're not as tied to it, assuming that the water soluble pencil that you use lets you move the pigment around afterwards. So for this section, I'm just going back over and showing you the different effects and the different looks that you get from different ways of using the watercolor pencil. All right, so for this one, I used the wrong labeled box. This is not actually mixing colors. This is more of blending colors that are next to each other. And you can do very light blending, or you can do pretty serious blending. And the amount of blending that you will be able to get will really depend on how much water you use, how much pigment you use, as well as the brand of pencil that you use. But for this, I basically went in with the yellow first and then went in with the red. And then I tried to, blend the colors together. And I did do it. I mean, if I had to do again, I would just do the middle and then do each of the ends. But anyway, that's something else that you can do, is you can take two colors side by side and blend them together to create different effects. So that's another thing that you can do with these water soluble pencils. Okay, one of my favorite ways to use the Albrecht Durer watercolor pencils is by layering them. And I know a lot of people say that only Inktense can be layered, but that's not true. You can totally layer the Albrecht Durers, and I am going to show you how. So it's very straightforward. So all you have to do is similar to watercolor, where the first layers you'll use the most water, and then you'll use progressively less water as you go along. So for this first layer, I just used a very light spraying of the watercolor pencils, the Albrecht Durer watercolor pencils, and then I used a relatively large brush for the area to get a bunch of water in there, and that will dissolve the pigment quickly and completely, and that will be your base layer. And I repeated that for the next few shapes, just because I wanted to be able to go back and show you guys the process. So that was for the first layer. The second layer is I just take the color and I apply it a little bit more pigment in a little bit smaller area. So look, you I don't like to press down. I know some people like to use a lot of pressure. I don't like to use a lot of pressure. What I prefer to use is just a light pressure and just going over it more. So that's what you see me doing for this area is I'm just taking that same light pressure and I'm just going over it more to try to get more pigment into this area to try to create like a little, I want to use the gold as the sort of background and create like, you know, something that's coming out of the outline. So that's what I did there. So what I did here is same as before. I just took a slightly darker color and I just went around it. I did speed this part up just because it was kind of a little bit boring of just, you know, watching me color. So it's the same as before where I just go in with, you know, a little bit more of a slightly darker color. And here I've switched to a relatively small water brush. Again, using less water than before, but still not a lot of water. And I'm sort of aiming the pigment to be the darkest edges towards the outside. Because again, trying to create that glow. Everybody's different, but I tend to prefer water brushes that don't deposit a lot of pigment, so I tend to prefer the smaller brushes. Anyway, here we are going in with a darker color. Now we're going in with, I think this is burnt umber and burnt sienna. And I'm just going into the outer edges to increase the contrast and to sort of bring out that warm center. So I did speed this up a little bit. Mostly I like to go in real time, but I sped this up just because it was kind of boring and it was a little bit slow of just me coloring in and adding that. So, and then now I took, still adding color. So, oh, this is slow even with it sped up. So I'm glad that I sped this up. Anyway, I'm still adding color to the darker edges. And so the next thing that I did is I got a relatively small brush. Now this is the smallest size of the silver black velvet that I have. This is a size 2. And I took the size 2 just because it was a small brush. It holds a nice strong point, so I get a lot of control. And it lets me sort of really focus on what I want to do. But you can see that it's not lifting the lower layers at all, and it's letting me just keep adding to it. And I could keep adding a little bit more, but this is just letting me add a little bit more to it to try to get more of that contrast and to sort of bring out that center and to make it look like, you know, like it's a little bit of has a little bit of a glow. This last part here is, this is where I took the tip of the brush and I took the tip of the brush to the tip of the pencil to get just a little bit of really strong color and create some sort of foreground. You don't need to do it this way. There are other ways to get that little fine detail, but this is the way that I chose just because this is a popular way to do for coloring books, and this is a good way to get extremely fine detail, even though you could get, you know, moderately fine detail by laying down the brush. But this way really gets to the core of the detail. All right, this is the final thing that I wanted to show. What I'm mainly showing down here is there's sometimes people struggle with getting colors mixing together when they don't want the colors to necessarily mix. So one way to really avoid colors mixing together when you don't really want them to mix is to dissolve that lower level, because when you don't dissolve the lower level, they will mix together, and so this blue and yellow will create a green. Now if you wanted to glaze the yellow over the green, over the blue, I'm sorry, so what you would do in that case is you would dissolve all of the blue before going in with the yellow, and in this case, because I didn't dissolve all of the blue before I went in with the yellow, what it's going to happen is it's just going to create a greenish hue basically, and you're going to create a mix. Now this is important to know if you want to do something like you want to go in and you want to go in and you want to sketch and you want to put in all your values first and then go in with a local color. If you want to do that, then what you would do is you would dissolve that color first, and then go in after the fact with all of your local color. So as you can see here, now I'm dissolving it, and now it's really mixing it into a nice sort of a vibrant green, and it almost looks like it was intended to be green from the start. Like you almost can't tell that this was a yellow and a blue, a yellow and a blue. Yes, a yellow and a blue. But this way, you get that really nice mixture. This is also good to know if you are working with limited colors or the exact color that you want is not available. You can easily mix the color that you want and get the exact color that you want by mixing different colors together and then dissolving it as one sort of dissolved object. So that is the final way to use the watercolor pencils. All right, so at this point, I'm just going over and I just want to show you all the different ways to use the pencil, using them dry, using them wet, and applying water at various stages, blending the colors together, mixing the colors, as well as layering and using a combination of colors to create interesting effects and to sort of be able to imagine something and create it easily by combining all these different methods in a way that works for you. Now, I've talked about this in the past, but I just wanted to show you guys in this video because I know people are going to ask. This is the Greenish palette, and I'm using the rougher pencil side, but you can see that I had some pigment on there that has been dry for a while. This has been dry for a few months actually. And I have just gone back and picked it up as I needed the various parts. Like if I needed a little bit of blue, I just went and I picked it up, and then you can dissolve it and use it into this. So here I'm just going to draw a quick line with that. So that's one way to sort of preserve your the pencil and to be able to sort of maximize it. For me, since I use watercolor pencils so much, and it's probably, you know, one of my favorite mediums, having a watercolor palette like this is a sort of indispensable tool for me personally. And once again, there'll be a link to that down in the description below. And there'll be a link to this specific set down in the description below as well. I just want to take this moment and show you the set, but also to thank you guys for watching, ask you guys to share and subscribe if you have not already done so. Thank you guys once again for watching. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. There are links to all these products, including this set, down in the description, as well as links to Ko-fi, Patreon, all that other stuff, which helps fund the channel and makes videos like this possible, because this video absolutely would not be possible without you guys. So thank you guys so much, and I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. Okay, bye.